the perfect background for today.
All right, guys, have a great session.
Thank you. Marty, thank you, and thanks to Brent Innovators. Great programming as always. I really liked the last session with Heather and Victoria. Erin, great to see you today. Our topic of discussion is the future of media, emerging media channels. Before we do that, could you tell us a little more about the specifics of your role? Because I think that'll set the scene very well for our listeners today.
Absolutely. Thank you again for having me. So I am Erin Goldson. I'm a brand manager working on Dove, which is one of the many brands under the Unilever umbrellas. We have Dove, Shea Moisture, Tresemme. So I have the privilege of working on Dove, and I'm in a hybrid role. So one half of my role is really focused on the purpose work that is really the growth engine of Dove. So anytime there's a campaign that isn't specific to a product and more around kind of our point of view on beauty, we believe that beauty inclusivity, showing different versions of beauty is very important. So that's what I work on the purpose side. During COVID, all of the campaigns around Black Lives Matter, some of the campaigns we did around COVID, that's something that came out of the purpose team, which we call master brand internally. So overlooking all the different categories and kind of coming up with different communications that can work across, whether that's deos, hair, et cetera. And then the other aspect of my job is I'm also on the Dove Hair innovation team. So that's all around looking at white space opportunities, seeing what our competitors are doing, and figuring out what the future of hair innovation is going to look like. So literally creating products from start to finish, brainstorming what that packaging is going to look like, what the proposition is going to be, working with supply chain, working with the R&D, and then really bringing that product to market for our consumers.
Thank you, Erin. When we talked before, it was great to speak with you earlier this week to get a sense of what you're working on and how you're evaluating, emerging media channels. Heather and Victoria were just talking about Clubhouse and experimenting there and trying to connect with consumers in different ways. And then also your sort of tried and true, more mature platforms are evolving. The use case for them is changing. But regardless of new or sort of mature platforms, you talked about the lens of purpose a moment ago. Can you tell us sort of from a high level, sort of how that's the ethos of Unilever and Dove, and how you're using the lens of purpose to evaluate how you communicate with consumers, and then B, how you decide to use different platforms?
Yep. So I think as a company, Unilever, one of the things we often say are brands with purpose grow. And so we've been tasked to look across all of our different brands internally. So whether that's Dove or other brands, really evaluate where they are in their purpose journey. So a brand like Dove for Unilever is one that's a lot more established. I think people think of us when it comes to purpose. Usually we are case studies that people look to, or even a brand that even internally, I'm constantly getting asked questions on KPIs. How are you guys measuring purpose and learnings there? So I think it's nice because for Dove, this has just been something that we have done for quite a long time. And it's really this idea of making the idea of beauty universally accessible to all women. So that's showing women with different hair textures, different skin tones, different body shapes, different body, really making sure that we continue to expand on that definition of beauty and portray that not only in front of the camera with the campaigns that we're working on, but also behind the scenes, making sure that we have diverse advertisers and agencies that we're working with. And so as we look at different media and channels, I think for us, the hardest thing is a lot of times purpose assets and getting that purpose message can't always be done in 15 seconds or 30 seconds. Finding long form channels and ways to help really tell that purpose story is something that we've been leaning into. So it's a mix of using the traditional channels like TV, et cetera, but then also leaning into PR and organic content to help share those longer form assets where we can give a bit more background and share a bit more on what that purpose and our point of view is. So for us, it's it's that storytelling. It's not just selling an ad with a quick display, a display unit, but really thinking about how can we tell impactful stories. And the way we look at it from a Dove perspective is we kind of think about it in 4 different pillars. So we have the brand say, that's what the brand might say. That might be your typical advertising. That might be a print ad, a YouTube spot, but it's all things that the brand is saying about what purpose means to us. Then we have the brand do. We believe that it's easy to say, I stand for hair inclusivity, or I stand for diversity in front of the camera, but making sure that you're actually putting action behind what you're saying. So again, when we think about channels, it's not always the typical, like I think we've really started to bend the rules there. So one of the initiatives that I'm leading is our work on the Crown Act. So Dove is a proud co-founder of the Crown Coalition, which is a group of 3 other organizations that are championing anti-hair discrimination. And when we think about channels there, we're actually working to make legislative changes. We have to work with lobbyists. We have to think about what are different ways to get our messages out so that we can make sure that the work we're doing is also impacting legislation. That's just an example. And then back to the framework, so we have brand say and brand do. So the legislative change would fall under brand do. And then we have what's called others say and others do. How can we use the voices of others to help get the mission and purpose of Dove out? So an influencer or a partner might be an example of an other say. How do we use their equity to drive that brand that brand purpose along?
So you mentioned obviously purpose is the core of everything you do. Has that ethos evolved over the past year, or sort of going back to your pillars on the how, when you're trying to activate your influencers or your larger Dove community, is that constantly changing these days?
Yeah, I think we're constantly trying to push ourselves further when we talk about purpose and what that looks like. And one of the things we talk about is this idea of being an actionist brand. And so if you look at how our purpose has evolved, again, it's always been the core of the brand, but I think this whole pillar of brand do and others do is more critical, more than ever for Dove. So I think at one point we were more of just saying, like I think one of the iconic campaigns is our Real Beauty campaign that was in Times Square, where we showed women of all shapes and sizes. There wasn't necessarily a do associated with that. If that were to come out now, we'd probably be looking at, is there any legislation we can do, or is there any type of training and curriculums that we can do around body inclusivity, making sure that we actually have tangible actions beyond just the campaigns that we're running. So I think that is something that has been exciting to see, that like we are doing things like changing legislation. We talk internally a lot about how changing legislation, changing laws changes lives. And I think that's a space that we're leaning into a lot more, is not just showing the campaigns on TV, but making sure that there's work behind the scenes that everyone might not even be aware of, but is critical to the work and the messages that we're doing.
When you've been activating and seeing success with this sort of this actionist audience and consumer, are there newer platforms or partners you've been able to team up with to see any sort of success? And how are you measuring that? Is it signing petitions, having consumers take action? Are there any other back-end metrics or measurement you're also looking to here?
Yep. So, for example, some of the work that we're doing around the legislative work, every year we track kind of what are the states where we want to see laws change. What are the states where we think we'll be able to have immediate success? What are the states that will kind of come at a later point? And we track that. We see how we're doing. If you go to thecrownact.com, and on the right-hand corner, you can find the petition. Right now we have a little over, I think it's 254,000 signatures. Our goal for this year is to get 500,000 signatures. So how do we get people to not just watch our ads, but when they see what we're putting out there, they're actually taking an action to help support us in the work that we're doing. And then on top of that, we also have a lot of brand metrics we're able to look at. So are people associating the work that we're doing with Dove? What is that association? And then there's a number of other metrics that we look at. So we actually have metrics where we can look at how is Dove's purpose evaluated against competitors? Are we growing in that space? And then we also can look at different audiences. So how are our messages resonating with maybe the general market consumer versus the Black consumer? We've noticed actually that with the A consumer, they really are the ones who over-index in believing in what Dove says when it comes to our purpose, when it comes to our communication. I think they are a consumer that has grown up on Dove with Dove and using that in their households. And I think we continue to build trust with that demographic.
So with these actionist groups that you're building trust, are you finding they're able to also, they're sort of being their own micro influence and amplifying the work that you're doing, whether it's in their own household or their social groups?
Yep, exactly. Some of these mini micro influencers that we're not paying, but feel very strongly, feel passionate about the work, and they're sharing that. And that's also something we look at is how do we actually get our Dove community to engage in what we're doing, share our messages, and get that word out within their own communities.
Well, we already have some good Q&A I wanted to quickly touch on before we moved on. Someone asked, do you research the demographics of different media platforms outside of age, geography, race, religion, nationality, etc.? How does it inform the content that you're creating around these programs and then you go syndicate?
We research, so looking at demographics beyond race.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of, so maybe more of like psychographics.
Yeah, that's what I think they're getting at.
Yes, I mean, we have an incredible media team. We work very closely with Mindshare, and it's nice because they work across all of our brands. So we have lots of data on these platforms in terms of who is that consumer. We try to cut our data in terms of like, we want to reach consumers who want to take action. We look for purpose seekers. We find a way to cut the data so that we are finding the platforms where we can reach this type of consumer. And then in addition to just the platforms, it's really the targeting within those platforms.
Got it. Thank you. Something I want to sort of move ahead to, because I know this is going to have a lot of good questions. You mentioned launching brands from start to finish and everything in the middle, and you launched a new hair care brand in the middle of COVID, which has to be an immense challenge within itself. Can you walk us through sort of how you went from ideation to actual products on the shelves this year, and what were the successful platforms in order to, reach consumers and have them, buy a new product in the middle of a pandemic?
Yep. So I led the creation. Let me move this Q&A section down. Lots of great questions. I led the launch of a range of products from Dove called Amplified Textures. So again, selfishly, as a Black woman with natural curly textured hair and a number of friends in the same group, I noticed that there was a white space opportunity. We didn't have, while our products, we have shampoos, we have conditioners that can be used with all hair types. I knew that, especially for the Black consumer, they want to make sure that products are created specifically for their hair type in mind, even though maybe our general market conditioner could work just as well. They want to understand that the product was created for them, for their hair texture, with that in mind. And so it was really exciting doing lots of different workshops, trying to get into the consumer mindset, taking myself out of it and really understanding what is it that they're looking for from a product standpoint, and what could Dove do to help close this gap. And I think what was interesting is when we look across all of our categories for Dove, as I mentioned, as a brand, there's a strong affinity with the A community. And we noticed across all of our categories, whether that's body, EOs, everything but hair, over-indexed with the Black consumer. And so that also helped validate that there was a need for more of a tailored solution to help capture the consumer as it relates to Dove hair. And so, like I said, we had a number of different workshops. We had ingredient workshops. We worked with real women, Black female editors, influencers to gain their input. And so I worked on everything from looking at the packaging, coming up with the names and the products of the SKU, what was on the front of pack, the back of pack, and even the commercial shoot. I think the sad thing with COVID was some of the assets and some of our media plan did have to cut. There was a number of media cuts happening across the organization, and I'm sure a number of other brands and organizations saw that same thing happening. But what was interesting was that during COVID, because of salons being closed, we actually found that this consumer was at home experimenting and trying new products more than ever. And so while we unfortunately couldn't have the full media plan that we had initially planned on, we did see an opportunity where consumers were just going in the store and trying new things on their own. And one thing that we launched was this program called Wash Day Live, where we partnered with celebrity stylists and our influencers every week to give new tips and tricks for this consumer to try at home. So whether it was showing how you could cocktail and mix our different products together, or showing a new hairstyle, this is a really cool opportunity for us to engage with our consumer in a new way. So we used Instagram Live and really used this moment. I think we knew that people were at home, they had time, they weren't doing as much, and we knew that this consumer really values the advice of experts and influencers. So again, instead of this coming directly from Dove, we could have put out commercials and kind of things in the traditional media. It was leaning on the other say and their credibility to help drive purchase of the Amplified Textures line.
So it definitely seems like in order to be authentic, there was the rigor in the creation of the product itself, and then also working with your influencer community and Instagram Live. With Instagram Live or anything you've done in the social channels in 2021, has there been a large e-com component to that as well? So in the virtual salon example, are there any opportunities for consumers to learn a new hairstyle or learn about a new product and also purchase as well?
Yep. So we had purchase, and a nice part of another component of this Wash Day Live program was we partner with a number of hairstylists locally across the U.S. As well as there's an app called Swivel Beauty. So basically they have access to a number of different hairstylists. And so what we did was we paid the stylists. We recognized that they weren't making money with salons being closed, and we paid them to have virtual appointments. And then that would be an opportunity. So it would be something just like this if you were my stylist, and we could talk about questions I had at home. And then as part of that, we were driving to e-commerce. They spoke a lot about the Amplified Textures products, and then would drive to e-commerce as a way for the consumer to buy products.
Very interesting. And I am very impressed how the success of the program is, given all the changes in media consumption and just human behavior over the last year. Something I want to talk about is the importance of retail partnerships, retail media, and even in store. And when we spoke before, you mentioned that second to TV, in store is still to this day one of the key drivers of brand awareness. So when you're launching a new product, that is key. But then you also mentioned before, and we were able to catch up earlier this week, that the retail space and partnerships are also, it's almost like a 360 partnership. They help you push product, but also drive the purpose and actionist messaging home. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yep. So again, as I mentioned, purpose is really the core of Unilever as a brand, and Dove as well. And so as we look at all of our channels, so whether it's social, whether it's TV, we did realize that after TV in store drives number 2 for awareness. And so now we've been looking at what more can we do in store to help bring to life our various purposes. We have a Dove self-esteem program that we partner with retailers to do in-store displays. The work that we're doing around the Pound Act, we're actually going to have a display at Walmart in June. So pretty big in-store unit, prominent space, and we're going to actually put QR codes on that display to ask consumers to go sign the petition. Again, spread the word on what I was doing. But when you think about all the traffic and the captive audience that you have in retail, it really has been a key awareness driver for us, especially because a lot of times those consumers are going there looking for specific Dove products. They're quite familiar. I think it's different when you're looking at social media and people are scrolling, but when you're in that in-store experience, a lot of times people will take that extra time to stop and look and read and look at the messaging.
What is, I guess, from your personal perspective, what does the in-store experience look like moving forward? A lot of states are starting to open up. New York is opening up. I'm very happy about that. What is the in-store experience of the future? Is it the same as it previously was, or is it more of a hybrid, maybe a buy online, pick up in store?
I actually think, but when I think of, so we work with a lot of the mass channels, so the Walmarts, the Walgreens, Target. I think when I think of a retailer who's really getting it right is Target. They're leaning more and more into the beauty and experiential space when it comes to in-store. And I don't think people are shying away from that with COVID and the world opening up. I think these mass retailers are learning from the Sephoras of the world that people who like beauty and like these products, they want to experience them in store. They want to understand what they're buying and it not just be this sterile environment, but I think more and more experiential and bringing a little bit more of that emotion and beauty in store is going to be critical.
Emotion and beauty. Do you think some is lost if you don't have sort of the tactile or visual experience, like I guess Sephora or not Target is growing in store? So some of the true sort of brand value or positioning is lost if you can't physically be there and sort of touch and experience.
So it's funny because we also talk a lot about the digital shelf and how when we talk about in-store and retailer experience, it needs to evolve beyond not just thinking about how are we going to launch a product in person, but also what is that going to look like digitally, and the two should work together. We spend a lot of time whenever we're launching a new product, we talk about our 7 OA, our 7 omni assets, making sure that the digital shelf, we have strong images of front of pack, back of pack, images explaining how to use the product and what it goes well with. There's a whole strategy that we work on when also launching not only in store, but also from a digital standpoint.
What advice would you have to other marketers, whether it's a legacy brand or an emerging brand and marketing team, to sort of try to replicate and balance what you were just mentioning, sort of the sort of yin and yang to the in-store and online experience? What are the sort of the key things our marketers listening today should take away and remember moving forward?
I think it's a basic one, but I think it's something that we struggle with all the time, but is really being clear on what that single-minded messaging is, and how does that message change depending on the channel. So if there is something that we're doing for TV, what is that message? What do we want consumers to take away? What do we want them to do? What does that look like in store? What does that look like for our influencers? I think that is something we're constantly doing, and trying to think of, consumers aren't going to spend much time. And so making sure that that message is tailored per channel, but still consistent across the overall campaign, I think is something that we constantly are taking a step back and asking ourselves. So
as there's an explosion of new channels and different types, Clubhouse is getting a lot of press these days, rightfully so. Are you evolving your sort of brand mission statement and sort of the idea of purpose continuously so that you could invest in reach consumers in new channels? Because I'm imagining that not in every case does the channel align directly with your overall messaging. Yeah,
and again, like I was saying in the beginning, I think the struggle with purpose messaging is a lot of times when we look at, I mean, I've been having these conversations even yesterday with our media team, as we look to launch some of our new campaigns, we're talking, a lot of the inventory is around 15-second digital video buys, 6-second digital video buys, trying to consolidate a message that might take a minute to really tell the story and tell the power and tell the emotion. How do we get that to translate? And I think that's why some of these channels like a Clubhouse, I'm very, very interested to see what brands, I know brands have already started to do things there, but how do we find more of these avenues to have more conversations? So I think Clubhouse is interesting. We're currently working on a new podcast, a branded podcast with a prominent content creator. How do we look at different ways to get those long form messages out? But Clubhouse is one, and I think probably many have mentioned that today, is one that I'm quite excited to try. I've noticed, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, they just hired 2 people, one on the media side and one on the marketing side. So I think they're starting to build out their team, and I'm really curious to see how they're going to start partnering with brands. But I would love Dove to be on that list, and hoping to pilot a couple ideas in the coming couple of months as well.
I would love to see that. Earlier, I want to go back to something you just mentioned earlier. You talked about the importance of PR, and whether it's your purpose-driven marketing, your overall brand voice, the best way to get that across to your consumers is through longer form content. But not all of the media channels that consumers are spending all their time on today allow for that, which you just mentioned. So are you using channels like the Snapchats of the world or other social channels as like almost a trailer or teaser to then direct them to maybe a site or other property where you have all that long form content?
It's funny you say that, because we have a partnership and some exciting work coming out soon. I can't give it all away, but basically we're partnering with a music label actually to create a music video. So it's an iconic song that's been out for some time, but the song came out before the time of music videos. And so it's funny when you said the trailer idea, because that's actually how they launched. That's part of their launch plan, is kind of launching a shorter form mini trailer and then teasing people before the long form comes out. So we'll actually be taking that strategy that is typically seen in the music industry and maybe for TV shows and movies, and we're going to be applying that to Dove. But yes, we've used Snapchat, we've used some of the smaller form, and I think the nice thing about those channels, like the TikToks and the Snapchats, is the younger audiences are very, very action oriented. They're more diverse than ever. They care more than any of the other cohorts about these different diversity initiatives. And I even read, if you looked at TikTok users were more likely to join in a Black Lives Matter protest than anyone else. So I think when you think about who is on these different channels, we do notice that they very much are in line with what Dove as a brand stands for. So those actionists, those who want to take charge, make change, we're really seeing that from the Gen Z and the younger consumer, which has been great about engaging some of the other newer channels.
So I'm glad you mentioned that about the TikTok audience. So when you're communicating with them and developing and building enthusiasm and passion for things like Black Lives Matter, is that conversation siloed within only TikTok, or are you able to bring them to some other channels, maybe some of your own content or own properties as well, or is it a lot of different siloed conversations?
And to be completely honest, I think TikTok is a channel that we're just starting to dip our toes in. So we're even behind there. And last year when we launched, we had a response to what was happening with the Black Lives Matter protest and George Floyd. We had a whole campaign called America the Beautiful. And the idea was that America won't be beautiful until it's beautiful for everyone. But we made sure that we tapped our influencers for that campaign. We did TV, we did, it was very much a 360 campaign versus just siloing and focusing on one channel. And that's typically our approach, is making sure that we're really surrounding our consumer across a number of different earned and owned channels.
I like that concept of surrounding the consumer and having a lot of sort of parallel or different conversations that are tailored to each sort of media channel that you're working with. We only have about 5-7 minutes left. So if any listeners have any other questions, please input them to the Q&A function. But something I wanted to sort of ask you about, or in sort of, what is the biggest change that you found or most effective new media or channel to drive action from this actionist audience? You mentioned TikTok, but is the overall behavioral shifts you've seen around social justice issues or even during COVID shopping, is that going to be consistent from here on moving forward? Or is that something your brand purpose is to keep that passion going, if that makes any sense? Mm-hmm. Is that something you guys have to work to keep momentum on, or do you see the momentum here to stay?
I hope the momentum is here to stay. I think everything from the Stop Asian Hate conversations to what was happening during the last year with the Black Lives Matter protests, I think it's been nice because I think we are having significantly more conversations internally. It's unfortunate that, and not just internally, not just at work, but amongst peers across companies, I think it's allowed for a lot more conversation. And I think the nice thing when we even think about emerging media, some of it's taking the media that we've always had, but consumers, what I noticed last year were consumers were taking a stronger stance. There was a campaign, I think it was called Pull Up or Shut Up. And it was a whole Instagram page where this woman was basically asking companies, show us how diverse your boards are, show us how diverse your leadership is. So taking channels that have kind of existed for a long time, but really putting pressure on different companies to be transparent. And I think that to me what is what's been the most exciting, is how these different channels have really allowed consumers to participate with brands and corporations in ways that we haven't ever before. And they're really holding us accountable. And there are times when we're called out, and I actually love it, because sometimes there's things that I've thought about or things that I haven't known, it's been hard to articulate, but I think it's great when consumers are using these channels, not just for us to advertise to them on those channels, but also hold us accountable, push us to do more, and kind of call us out on making sure that we continue to walk the walk.
Yeah, I'm noticing a lot more of that. You're seeing that today with all the legislative action in Georgia. A lot more CEOs and brand leaders are having a voice, which is great to see. But it also seems that sort of brand messaging now is beyond sort of the product value, beyond sort of the parallel benefits of Dove hair. It's now to sort of your core as an organization. So it's definitely interesting to see that evolution. So as we sort of begin to wrap up, take things back to sort of a more personal level, has there been a sort of major shifts for yourself in terms of how you're shopping, your media consumption, and are you applying any of what you're experiencing yourself to your job and your brand building activities?
This is probably like the worst time for me to be on a panel like this, because I've been trying over the last month. So I've been working in the Caribbean. I'm trying to take advantage of this work from home, work from anywhere life. So I've actually been working in the Caribbean for the last, since end of February. And I've been trying to disconnect a bit from media. So I haven't been on Instagram, haven't been going on as much. So I'm probably not the best person to be asking right now. I've been trying to disconnect and really, really focus on those in-person, whether it's in person or speaking on the phone or reconnecting more. Because I think because of COVID and being at home more, it's just been very easy to get caught up on your phone. And I've been trying to monitor my cell phone usage and digital usage. So I'm almost reverting a bit at the moment. Is trying to, which makes it harder for work. I'm like, I don't think I'll be able to continue this that much longer. But I was doing a bit of a 1.5-month cleanse, just to really, really focus, and I'm enjoying it. But I think being on the different social channels is where I do find a lot of inspiration for work, where I get ideas. I see what other brands are doing. I might read about it, but I feel like I almost am seeing what people are talking about more when I'm fully engaged in those channels. And I think Clubhouse is one in particular that I'm really curious to see how it evolves. I'm noticing that a lot of other platforms like Instagram and LinkedIn are trying to find a way to hop on that trend. And we've seen that before, where other brands took what Snapchat was doing and incorporated that into their platform. And so Clubhouse, that's one that I'm excited to see who's going to win that battle. Is Clubhouse going to be here to stay, or is Instagram or something else going to kind of take over what they're trying to do?
It's interesting you mentioned sort of cleansing electronically. Us and everyone listening, we spend all day on a screen. We're on a Zoom, on our email, presentations, and the TV. And if you look on LinkedIn, a lot of people post about taking breaks from media consumption. And as it seems like it's, fairly popular, or a lot of people are doing it, how are you still able, as of putting your marketer hat back on, communicate and make sure people are still aware of what you're doing, whether it's new product releases or your purpose-driven efforts? Is that where you're leaning into PR the most, so that regardless of what media people are consuming, they understand what you're doing?
I mean, I think for us, success is obviously we can have a great media campaign, we can work with influencers, but I think the best work is when we create something and editors want to write about it, people want to share it. I mean, Nike had a great new maternity campaign that came out the other week, and I didn't even see that online. I read it somewhere, and then so I shared it with someone else, and someone else shared. And I think when people genuinely want to share the work that you're doing, I think that's really when the magic is happening. I think and even with products, I think when it's a great product, people are they're gonna share with their friends and share with their community.
We have one more question come in, but I see Marty, so I think we're at time. I always feel bad, like I come on and I'm like the guy on stage going, "Come on."
I think I know. I think when the people see you're at sort of the end, they're like, "Oh no, I have to get this question in now." But unfortunately, we don't have time for that.
Of course. Well, Erin, Adam, thanks so much for a great session. I really enjoyed it. Erin, thanks so much for sharing about the 4 pillars at Dove. I thought that was really interesting in terms of how you're approaching that. I was going to make a wisecrack about the anti-hair discrimination, but I'm sure you really experience it more so than me, other than the follically challenged. But listen, it was really a pleasure to have you both. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and really appreciated you sharing everything, Erin. And great questions.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So